In a controversial new proposal, one state wants to make it even easier for violent criminals to be released from prison. Have a look. The number of prisoners aged 55 and older has grown 500% over the last 2 decades. In 2019, there were over 1.3 million people in state prisons in the U.S. There are various geriatric parole laws across the country to consider the release of certain elderly inmates. However, the state of Virginia recently proposed an update to the current law, which would automatically grant release to prisoners 60 or 65 years and older. It applies to Class 2 felonies and lower, which include any form of deadly assault that results in a serious or permanent bodily impairment, including the loss of pregnancy. The proposal is assuming people become less violent as they get older. Do aggressive behaviors truly decrease as we age? Or is this idea a potential public danger? Joining us now is neuroscientist Dr. Vaughn. We know that there's a problem with prison overcrowding. We know that having prisoners is expensive. We would love to release people as soon as possible if they're no longer a danger to society. What are your thoughts on this proposed amendment and the idea that you age out of violence?
I don't think this amendment should pass. We don't fundamentally care about age. We care about, are you likely to commit an unacceptably violent act in the future? And there is a general relationship between age and violence, that as you get older, you're less likely to commit violent actions. We think that this might be linked with testosterone's effect on the brain, and that tends to decrease over time, that testosterone levels decrease with age. But this is only true on average. It's not, there are many specific examples where it doesn't hold water. And so what you really want to think about is, well, what's a better metric? How could we actually think about this in a more constructive way? And so when you start to look at some of the brain data, there are different brain regions that are involved for controlling violent impulses that should probably be something that's looked at far more than just age.
So how could you do that? Is there an imaging study or a psychological test you might be able to administer to see?
As we understand the neuroscience, we're starting to make inroads, and we understand that there are some pathways for violence that we're starting to understand are implicated in what's happening. So, for example, aggressive behavior often activates a brain region known as the amygdala, and the amygdala can lead to this powerful emotional response. Sometimes a brain region known as the prefrontal cortex comes online and inhibits that urge and can stop a violent impulse from happening. But what we see is in people with mental illness, that relationship is broken. And so, for example, one study found that with violent offenders, their amygdala was just hyperactive. It was much more likely to have this emotional response to exactly the same stimuli relative to someone who doesn't have that issue.